Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today I want to talk about the 5 largest tech companies in the United States because the Federal Trade Commission is starting to do a deep dive and look into possibly breaking up some of their acquisitions. Now, here's what's going on. If you weren't aware, but the 5 biggest tech companies in the United States, that's Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, love to acquire smaller companies. And in the past decade, they have been doing that at pretty much a record pace. Now, they've been acquiring smaller companies as well as some of their smaller competitors. And now this quashing of potential competition is coming under new scrutiny by the Federal Trade Commission. Now, if we look at the last decade, at these top 5, we can see that they have been acquiring companies left and right. And so let's go down the list from the least, the company that's acquired the least to the most, which is absolutely insane. The first one on that list, surprisingly enough, is Amazon. Now, Amazon has been very public about their acquisitions, and I think they probably are in the news the most, short of, let's say, some high-profile ones by the others. But since 2010 to today, Amazon has acquired 64 different companies, many of which are competitors or could be classified as such. Apple has purchased 88 competitors in the last decade, and that includes things like Beats, which was formerly owned by Dr. Dre, who's a hip hop mogul, etc. Facebook clocks in at number 3 with 91 acquisitions in the last in the last decade, since 2010 to today, which I'm really surprised. I did not know Facebook was acquiring that much. I know they've gotten Instagram, and WhatsApp and some others very high profile that they've pretty much welded into their main platform, but that was surprising. Microsoft clocks in at number 2, and they have acquired 99 different companies over the last decade or so. And I know that they've acquired Skype and some others, and so that is a very interesting list. But hands down, by far, the number one acquirer is Alphabet, who owns Google. And when they got tired of Google, they basically created Alphabet to start acquiring companies. So it's no surprise that in the last decade, they have had 195 different acquisitions. That is a huge amount of acquisitions for Google, aka Alphabet. Now, the Federal Trade Commission basically announced this past Tuesday that it's going to step up its antitrust scrutiny of these 5 companies or so. And this is an escalation of the FTC's efforts to curb the domination basically of industries by a handful of tech companies. And these companies are already facing public backlash. We know that, for example, Facebook has been in the news consistently with all the data breaches, etc. Google, aka Alphabet, data mining and everything. Amazon, I've done things on some of their acquisitions, like the Ring doorbell, their facial recognition technology. And so I think Americans and probably the general public around the globe that are starting to use these or have been using these massive companies for years are starting to realize that we're basically having our personal information, for lack of a better term, I don't want to say stolen, but taken from us because we're not reading the terms of service, and then sold to various third parties, which by virtue of that, we've seen an increase in targeted advertising, increased spam, all this kind of stuff. And so that is very serious. Now, alongside the growing FTC scrutiny, the Department of Justice launched a broad probe into potential anti-competitive practices a few months ago, late last summer. And so here we are. The government, the United States government in this case, is looking at the big 5 and seeing, are we actually violating, or rather, are they actually violating consumer confidence by creating basically the new monopoly, formerly Standard Oil, formerly Telephone. Now we're looking at big tech. And here are my thoughts on this, because this is basically the layout of what's going on. But there's a couple of different things. And the first thing is President Trump. Now, President Trump actually has been praising these companies recently, calling them, at least 4 of them, this excludes Facebook, the $1 trillion MAGA Club, MAGA, which is one of President Trump's slogan. It stands for Make America Great Again. And he recently said that MAGA, or MAGA, M-A-G-A, stands for Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon. Basically, those four companies that are valuated at $1 trillion. Facebook is not on that list because they're not at $1 trillion, but they are getting close as they continue to grow amazingly, even though they are getting data breaches every week. And I literally just reported on one a couple of days ago from last week. So that's absolutely nuts. But by virtue of that, the president basically is able to appoint the attorney general as he is able to appoint the heads of every other cabinet. And again, this is not getting political, but if they have a favorable rating with the president, then the Department of Justice may be disinclined to continue its investigation or wind it down. How that affects the FTC, I don't know. But if these 5 massive tech companies have an ally in President Trump, that may go a long way to ensuring the stability of these companies, as well as any potential ramifications that the FTC may have from trying to unwind a previous acquisition. And that's what they're looking at. So, for example, if Microsoft that acquired Skype for whatever reason, the FTC says, well, that's an antitrust violation, they may have the ability they may have to force Microsoft rather to separate Skype from Microsoft. And so that's what we're talking about here. And so my next point I want to make is that the numbers for these acquisitions are staggering, but it doesn't really tell the whole picture here. So if I combine Amazon at 64 all the way up to Alphabet at 195, between these 5 companies, they have 537 acquisitions in the last decade combined. But Amazon has other issues as well. And one of those issues is acquisitions of small sellers. Now, what I mean by this is we have seen a slew of reports coming out where a seller says, I'm selling my wares on Amazon Marketplace. I've been doing really good, phenomenally good. Amazon sees this trend because they've got analytics on how much I'm selling as a small seller and decides in their Amazon Basics or Amazon Essentials that they're going to start selling the product that I've been selling, and they're going to undercut me, in which case everybody is now going to leave me from buying my product and move over to Amazon because Amazon can mass produce it for much cheaper than I can or what I acquire it for. And by virtue of that, a small seller gets put out of business, effectively acquiring what that person was doing. That is not really addressed in these 537 acquisitions because we are talking about tech companies typically buying other tech companies. And by virtue of that, I think there's greater scrutiny that needs to be paid to Amazon in this, and they are probably the most public of all of these when it comes to actual acquisitions, although I was surprised to see how many the others had done. Now, the third point I want to make here is that many of these acquisitions fly under the radar, and not all of them are competition quashing. So, for example, Facebook bought Oculus. Oculus does virtual reality, the 3D goggles, that kind of stuff. And that's a product ad, but Oculus was never a threat to Facebook's core business. So Facebook bought them probably to enhance the future virtual reality experience that would be, let's say, connecting to Facebook or whatever that's going to look like. And so how is the FTC going to handle that situation when they're looking at, this kind of scrutiny? Conversely, Alphabet, who owns Apple, has a very diversified portfolio of companies that they have purchased. For example, Alphabet owns Google, which is their main cash cow, but they also own Boston Robotics, which is an entirely different vertical and doesn't compete with what Google does, which is give you basically search results to data mine you so that they can sell to advertisers. Boston Robotics obviously creates robotics. And so what does that look like? If you are breaking up an Alphabet, is it from their 195 acquisitions, are 100 of them perfectly fine for those to own, but the other 95 are strategically looking at killing specific verticals of industry or technology that Alphabet has? I think this needs to be clearer. So then the question becomes that I have, does acquiring different technologies make your main product, when it makes your main product better, does that count as a monopoly? And so if Facebook buys Oculus, for example, and I'm not really a Facebook fan, but let's say they have done this because it is going to improve the offering of what Facebook is is that really a monopoly situation? And I think we need to figure this out, because there is no doubt that there are smaller competitors to the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world. And if they are buying those people to put them out of business, or let's say that smaller site is doing something wholly unique while it's competing with a Facebook, and Facebook acquires it because they want that uniqueness, Instagram, I think, would probably be an example of that, then where is that line? And I think that's something that we really need to understand, because when we are looking at previous monopolies, we had a flat system for technology. In the case of Standard Oil, you basically had just oil producers. That's the only thing they did. Now, you might have been able to increase efficiency and production and all of that, which is something that Standard Oil was apparently very good and notorious for. But at the end of the day, everybody's producing the same product, whether you're Standard Oil or you're that competitor soon to be bought or put out of business by Standard Oil. And it's the same with the telephone company. That technology really hadn't changed. You pick up a phone, you dial a number, and before we had automatic switching, you'd get a switchboard that would connect you, and after that you'd have automatic switching. But at the end of the day, that technology was static for decades. Now we have a situation where the internet has created a platform for us to create new and innovative products that can be wholly unique, although competing with the aspect of a larger business. And where does that begin and where does that end? And I think it's a very important question that we need to ask before we start saying these companies need to be broken up. I think personally that these companies, especially Facebook and stuff like that, need to really have the brakes slammed on it, because they are getting our data violated and data mined, in ways that when we even are signing an end user license agreement that we never read, goes way above and beyond that. That has been documented. I've talked about that, not to mention the multiple lies that Mark Zuckerberg has told in front of Congress that I put out on a video last April from primary sources. I'm working on version 2.0 of that. I think we need to really start understanding why we should be targeting them and for what reasons. And so that's the thing. Is this going to be an actual anti-monopoly thing? Where does the scrutiny begin and end with the FTC? And if there are actual legitimate cases of that, then yes, I do believe that should be stepped in at some point. But again, the successful will thrive when you've got a new and innovative product, regardless of what you do, I think. So we're going to see. We're going to see where this goes. Feel free to disagree with me. I know a lot of you oftentimes do, but I enjoy the discourse. So with that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, owned by Google, YouTube is. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.